Mallorie was already prepared to walk away from Racit when he finally gave her the one thing she had been demanding from him for weeks. Proof. Not another promise, not another emotional speech, not another trust. Proof. And somehow, that proof made everything worse before it made anything better. Because Racit had secretly given up something that could have changed his own future. And he did it for Mallorie while knowing there was a very real chance she would still leave him. He did not ask her permission. He did not tell her what he was planning. He did not even use the sacrifice to convince her to stay. That is exactly why Mallorie breaks down. But here's the part that makes this relationship much more complicated than a simple romantic moment. If Racit's sacrifice proves that his love was real, does that mean Mallorie was wrong to distrust him? Or does the fact that he made such a major decision behind her back prove that her trust issues were never completely irrational? Because both things can be true. Racit can love Mallorie deeply and still communicate terribly. Mallorie can have legitimate reasons to feel unsafe and still misread the man standing in front of her. And by the time Racit finally puts everything on the table, Mallorie is not casually thinking about leaving anymore. Her bag is packed. Emotionally, she has already started saying goodbye. She believes this conversation is going to confirm the ending she has been preparing herself for. Racit seems to know that too. But instead of grabbing the bag, blocking the door, begging her to reconsider, or delivering some huge romantic speech, he tells her something she clearly does not expect. If she still wants to leave after hearing the truth, he will not stop her. And strangely enough, that may be the first moment Mallorie actually starts believing that this man loves her. Because the real problem between Racit and Mallorie was never just one secret. It was what happened after trust started disappearing. Once Mallorie became convinced that something about Racit did not add up, she stopped looking at individual actions individually. Everything went through the same filter. Racit takes a private phone call. Suspicious. He pauses before answering. Suspicious. He changes the subject. Suspicious. He says, "Don't worry about it." Even more suspicious. And this is what happens when mistrust becomes the default setting in a relationship. You stop asking, what does this specific thing mean? You start asking, how does this prove what I already think? That is a dangerous place for any couple, because eventually neutral behavior starts looking guilty. But I do not think Mallorie is simply looking for excuses to hate Rasit. If anything, I think the opposite is happening. She keeps questioning him because part of her still wants him to convince her that she is wrong. That distinction matters. When somebody is completely done, they usually stop testing you. They stop asking. They stop demanding explanation. They stop caring whether your story makes sense. Mallorie is still asking because she still wants an answer she can believe. The problem is that Racit keeps answering the wrong question. Racit thinks Mallorie is asking, "Do you love me?" So he says yes. He tells her his feelings are real. He tells her he sees a future. He tells her she matters. He tells her he would not be putting himself through all of this if he did not care. But that is not really what Mallorie wants to know anymore. Her actual question is it safe for me to believe that you love me? That is much harder. Because you can tell somebody you love them all day. Safety comes from consistency, transparency, predictability. Knowing that when something uncomfortable happens, you are not going to discover half the truth 3 days later. And that is where Racit keeps failing her. The clearest example is when Mallorie asks the simplest possible question, why should I believe you? Now, if you are Racit, this should be the moment. This is where you tell her everything. This is where you stop being vague. This is where you understand that the relationship has moved beyond romance and into credibility. Instead, Racit freezes. And to Mallorie, that hesitation probably feels like the answer. Think about how quickly that would confirm every fear she already has. If the man loves me, why does he need time to explain why I should trust him? If he is telling the truth, why does every serious question seem to make him uncomfortable? If nothing is wrong, why do I always feel like I am missing part of the story? That is the emotional math Mallorie is doing. But Racit's silence does not necessarily mean he has no answer. It may mean the answer is tied directly to the secret he is not ready to reveal. And this is where Racit becomes both sympathetic and incredibly frustrating, because having good intentions does not automatically make secrecy healthy. That is one of the biggest traps in relationships like this. Someone says, I kept it from you because I was trying to protect you. Okay, but protect her from what? The truth? Her own reaction? The ability to participate in a decision that affects her life? That is where good intentions can start looking a lot like control. And viewers would probably divide sharply here. A section of the audience would look at Mallorie and say, nothing Rasit does will ever be enough for her. They would argue that she has already decided he is guilty and is just waiting for evidence to support it. But another section would probably say, why should she trust him when he keeps proving that he is comfortable withholding important information? And both sides would have a point. That is what makes Racit and Mallorie interesting. There is no easy villain. Racit is not necessarily lying about his feelings. Mallorie is not necessarily inventing insecurity out of nowhere. Their real problem is that they have built a communication system where both people expect the worst response from the other. Racit thinks, if I tell Mallorie everything now, she will misunderstand it. Mallorie thinks, if Racit refuses to tell me everything now, he must be hiding something bad. So Racit withholds more. Mallorie suspects more. Racit feels unfairly judged. Mallorie feels increasingly excluded, and the cycle starts feeding itself. Then Racit says something that sounds romantic on paper. He wants to prove his love through action, not words. Now, normally that sounds great, but put yourself in Mallorie's position. You already think this man is withholding information, and now he is basically saying, stop asking me to explain myself. Eventually, my actions will make sense. That does not feel reassuring. That feels like another request for blind faith. To Racit, he is saying, let me show you. To Mallorie, he is saying, stop asking questions. Same sentence, completely different emotional meaning. And because neither one of them seems able to recognize that difference, Mallorie starts pulling away, but not loudly. That is important. She gets quiet. And quiet Mallorie is far more dangerous to this relationship than angry Mallorie. When she is arguing, she is still fighting for something. She still wants resolution. She still wants Rasit to say the right thing. But when those arguments start disappearing, Rasit almost seems relieved. He should not be. Because sometimes silence is peace, and sometimes silence means someone has decided the relationship is no longer worth the energy of another fight. Mallorie starts mentally separating her future from Rasit. She thinks about what she needs, where she would go, how she would move forward, how she protects herself if this relationship ends. This is not the same as saying, maybe I should leave, during an argument. That is emotional language. Packing a bag is logistics. That is when the threat becomes a plan. And Rasit eventually realizes Mallorie is much closer to leaving than he thought. What interests me is his reaction. He does not explode. He does not accuse her of betrayal. He does not start dramatically demanding that she unpack. He gets calm, almost too calm, and that immediately creates another question. Has Rasit finally accepted that he is losing her, or has he already made a decision of his own? Mallorie thinks she is the only person preparing for the end. She is not. Rasit has been preparing too, just for a completely different reason. Then, Mallorie gives him what feels like his last real opportunity. Tell me everything. No vague answers. No, you will understand later. No more protecting me from information I am directly asking you to give me. This is Racit's chance to save himself. And somehow, he still does not tell her the whole truth. From Mallorie's perspective, that is devastating. Because now she is not asking him to prove romance. She is asking him to prove honesty. And he still appears to choose secrecy. At this point, imagine being Mallorie. You have spent weeks wondering whether your instincts are warning you. You finally sit the person down and basically say, I am giving you one opportunity to make all of this make sense. And he still says, not yet. What conclusion are you supposed to reach? This is why I cannot put the entire collapse of trust on Mallorie. Rasit knows what the issue is. He knows she feels shut out. He knows she believes he is hiding something. And technically, she is right. He is hiding something. She is simply wrong about what the secret means. That difference eventually saves Racit emotionally, but it does not erase the process that got them here. Then, he tells her something that almost sounds like surrender. If you still want to leave after tomorrow, I won't stop you. That line would probably destroy Mallorie in the moment. Because remember what she has been asking herself this entire time. Does this man really care whether I stay? And now, he is basically telling her the door is open. She expected a fight. She expected desperation. She expected him to finally panic when he realized she was serious. Instead, Racit almost accepts the possibility that she is leaving. And Mallorie reads that calmness as lack of love. But the truth is almost the exact opposite. Racit is not refusing to fight because she means nothing to him. He is refusing to trap her because she means too much to him. That distinction changes everything. Then, all of those little suspicious details start coming back. The calls, the paperwork, the unexplained meetings, the money conversation, the distracted behavior, the decisions he would not fully discuss. All of the things Mallorie had been collecting as evidence against him suddenly start pointing somewhere else. And this is where the situation gets really painful for her. Because the evidence was real. Mallory did not imagine those phone calls. She did not imagine Racit hiding paperwork. She did not imagine that he was dealing with something behind her back. Her mistake was not noticing the behavior. Her mistake was deciding she already knew the motive. That is a much more interesting problem. Racit was arranging something connected to Mallory's future. And importantly, he was not preparing to escape responsibility. He was preparing to absorb the bigger loss himself. But before he can explain that, Mallory finds another piece of evidence. And without context, it looks terrible. Maybe money has moved. Maybe something valuable has been sold. Maybe a career plan has been canceled. Maybe Racit has signed away an opportunity. Whatever she sees, her first interpretation is obvious. He is preparing for life without me. And can we really be shocked that she thinks that? Racit has created an information vacuum. And when people do not have facts, they fill the empty space with whatever explanation matches their existing fear. Mallory is already expecting betrayal. So the second she sees undeniable evidence that Racit has been making private plans, she does not think, maybe this is a surprise sacrifice for me. She thinks, I knew I was right. That is one of the most believable things about this entire conflict. People rarely interpret new information in a completely neutral way. They interpret it through the story they are already telling themselves. Mallory's story is simple. Rasit hides things. Rasit makes decisions without her. Racit eventually leaves her dealing with the consequences. So now she believes she has caught him. And that is when Racit finally does something he probably should have done much earlier. He stops explaining around the truth. He puts it in front of her. Read the document. Look at the final page. And suddenly, the entire story flips. Racit had an opportunity that could have made his own future much more secure. Maybe financially, maybe professionally, maybe personally. But accepting that opportunity would have put Mallory in a position where staying with Racit meant giving up something major in her own life. Her independence, her future plans, her connection to family, her freedom to choose. Racit understood that if he asked Mallory to make that sacrifice, there was a good chance she would resent him for it later. And more importantly, he knew she already felt like this relationship was asking too much of her. So Racit made the decision himself. He gave up the opportunity. He chose the loss. Not because Mallory demanded it. Not because she threatened to leave unless he did it. Not because he believed it would buy her loyalty. He did it so she would never have to choose between loving him and protecting her own future. That is huge. But the most important part is not what Racit gave up. It is what he refuses to demand afterward. Mallory asks the obvious question. If you really thought I might leave, why would you do this? And Racit gives her the answer she was not prepared for. I didn't do it so you would stay. That is the line that breaks her. Because now the sacrifice has no transaction attached to it. Racit is not saying, look at what I gave you. Now choose me. He is saying, I wanted you to have the choice, even if that choice hurts me. And for Mallory, that hits the exact center of her fear. Because I do not think her deepest fear is simply that Racit will cheat, lie, or leave. Her deeper fear seems to be losing control of her own life inside the relationship. If I depend on this man, what does he expect from me? If he sacrifices something, do I owe him? If I choose him now, will he remind me later of everything he gave up? If I make myself vulnerable, does love eventually turn into obligation? That is what Mallory is protecting herself from. And Racit finally gives her something she has not been able to see before. Love without a demand attached. He has already accepted that she might take the freedom he created and use it to leave him. That is why her tears should not be reduced to simple guilt. Yes, guilt is probably part of it. She realizes she may have assigned Racit motives he did not have. She realizes some of the behavior she interpreted as abandonment was actually connected to protecting her options. She realizes the man she believed was planning around her may have been planning for her. But there is another emotional hit underneath that. If Mallory accepts that Racit was telling the truth about loving her, she now has to question her own judgment. And that is uncomfortable. She has been telling herself, I have to stay alert because something is wrong. That belief made her feel safe. It gave her a sense of control. So what happens when she discovers that her fear may have been real, but her interpretation was incomplete? That does not make her stupid. It does not mean she was wrong to ask questions. It means fear became so loud that she stopped leaving room for another explanation. And Racit needs to own his part too. because I do not want to turn this into a situation where Mallory cries, apologizes for everything, and Racit walks away looking like a flawless victim. He is not. Rasit decided that because his intentions were good, he had the right to decide what Mallory should know and when she should know it. That is a problem. You cannot build trust while secretly managing somebody's access to information, especially when that person is already telling you, "I feel like you are keeping things from me." Rasit may call that protection. Mallory experiences it as exclusion. And if they stay together, that pattern has to change. Racit has to learn that protecting somebody does not mean deciding for them. Sometimes protection looks like saying, "This is difficult, but you deserve to know, and we are going to face it together." That is very different from, "I will tell you after I solve it." Mallory has her own work to do because she cannot continue turning suspicion into certainty. There are moments where she seems to decide what Racit means before he even finishes explaining. And if every conversation begins with the assumption that the other person is lying, communication eventually becomes impossible. Racit starts thinking, "Why should I explain? She has already decided." Mallory starts thinking, "Why should I trust him? He never explained." And there is the trap. Her suspicion makes him withdraw. His withdrawal makes her more suspicious. Her suspicion then confirms his belief that openness is pointless. His secrecy confirms her belief that he cannot be trusted. Now, both people have evidence for the exact fear that their own behavior helped create. That is the relationship pattern I would be watching much more closely than the sacrifice itself. Because the sacrifice is dramatic. The pattern determines whether they survive. And this is also where viewers would probably split into camps. One side would say, Racit finally proved everything, and Mallory owes him an apology. Another side would say, hold on. A romantic sacrifice does not erase weeks of secrecy, and I think the strongest interpretation sits somewhere in the middle. Rasit deserves credit for what he did. Mallory deserves room to process how he did it. Those are not contradictory positions. The motive matters. The method matters too. A grand gesture can reveal love. It cannot replace communication. And that becomes the real question after Mallory's tears stop. What happens next Tuesday? What happens the next time Racit gets a phone call and walks into another room? What happens the next time money becomes stressful? What happens when Mallory notices something that does not make sense? What happens when family members start questioning his decisions? What happens when Racit genuinely believes he knows what is best for both of them? That is where we find out whether this moment changed the relationship or simply gave them one emotional break from the same cycle. Racit eventually draws a boundary of his own. Mallory asks whether he would still make the same sacrifice, knowing she might never trust him completely. He says yes, but then he makes something clear. He cannot spend the rest of the relationship proving his innocence every time she gets scared. And that is fair. Love does not mean agreeing to live permanently on trial. Mallory needs reassurance. Racit needs good faith. He should be willing to answer hard questions. She has to be willing to hear the answer before deciding it is a lie. If either one of those things is missing, this relationship eventually collapses no matter how powerful this sacrifice feels right now. Then, Mallory finally gives Rasit the sentence he has been waiting to hear. Not "I trust you completely." Not "I will never doubt you again." Not "we are going to be together forever." She simply tells him, "I believe that you love me." And I actually think that is stronger because it is specific. It does not pretend everything is fixed. For the first time, the biggest emotional question between them has an answer. Mallory believes his feelings are real, but that immediately creates a harder question. Is real love enough? Reality TV has shown us over and over that two people can genuinely love each other and still be terrible at building a life together. Love does not solve communication problems. Love does not automatically fix money stress. Love does not erase family pressure. Love does not make cultural differences disappear. Love does not heal insecurity overnight. And love definitely does not create trust by itself. Rasit has proven something emotional. Now they have to prove something practical. Can Mallory ask questions without turning them into accusations? Can Rasit tell uncomfortable truths before she discovers them? Can they disagree without turning every argument into, maybe this relationship was a mistake? Can they make decisions together instead of protecting themselves from each other? Those are much harder tests. Then comes the detail that makes Racit's sacrifice hit even harder. Mallory was already leaving. Her bag was packed. Not next week. Not eventually. That night. In her mind, this relationship was almost over before Racit showed her the truth, which means Racit made this sacrifice while believing he could lose both things, the opportunity and Mallory. That completely changes the emotional weight. He was not sacrificing inside a secure relationship where he knew he would be rewarded with love and gratitude. He was doing it while watching her move closer to the door. And when Mallory finally puts the bag back down, notice what she does not do. She does not suddenly unpack everything and announce that they are fixed. She does not erase the previous conflict. She does not promise forever. She simply decides not to leave tonight. That is actually much more believable. Racit's sacrifice should earn reconsideration. It should not automatically earn permanent reconciliation. Mallory does not owe him forever because he gave something up for her. And the moment Racit accepts that may be the moment she finally feels safest with him. There is a strange irony in that. The more Racit tried to convince Mallory to believe him, the more she resisted. The moment he accepts that she has the right to leave, she finally starts believing him. Because now love does not feel like a trap. It does not feel like debt. It does not feel like something that comes with a bill Mallory will have to pay later. And this is where I think the next phase gets very dangerous. Mallory could overcorrect. She could feel so guilty about doubting Racit that she stops questioning him altogether. That would be a mistake. Trust is not blind belief. Trust means you can ask a difficult question without believing the relationship is automatically in danger. Rasit cannot use this sacrifice forever. If every future disagreement becomes, after everything I gave up for you, how can you question me? Then, Mallory's original fear comes roaring back. The strongest version of Racit is the man who says, I did it because I loved you. You owe me nothing. The moment he starts using the sacrifice as leverage, its meaning changes, and viewers would notice that immediately. Mallory has another risk, guilt. If she stays because she genuinely wants Racit, that is one thing. If she stays because leaving now makes her feel like a terrible person, that is something completely different. Guilt can hold a relationship together temporarily. It cannot make it healthy. Mallory needs to be able to say, I misjudged this situation, without turning that into, therefore, I am never allowed to question Racit again. That is the difference between learning from a mistake and losing confidence in your own instincts. Her real growth would be learning the difference between fear and evidence. Fear says, something feels wrong, so Racit must be guilty. Healthy caution says, something feels wrong, so I need more information before I decide what it means. Racit needs his own version of that lesson. Love says, I want to protect you, so I am going to face this with you. Control says, I want to protect you, so I will decide what you are allowed to know. That difference will determine everything going forward. And if I had to predict the next major conflict, I do not think it would come from some massive betrayal. I think it would come from a smaller moment. That would actually be more revealing. Maybe Racit makes another decision without Mallory because he thinks he is helping. Mallory notices. That old feeling hits her stomach. Now what? Does she immediately accuse him? Or does she ask? And when she asks, does Racit answer? Or does he get offended that she still has doubts? That is the true test. Because dramatic moments are easy compared to ordinary habits. Anybody can have one emotional breakthrough. Can you behave differently 3 weeks later when nobody is crying and there is no giant revelation waiting at the end of the conversation? That is where relationships are actually decided. Outside influence could make this even harder. Imagine Mallory tells someone close to her what Racit did. One person says, that man clearly loves you. Another says, why was he making a life-changing decision without telling you? Now Mallory is hearing two completely different interpretations of the same sacrifice. And because she already struggles with trusting her own read of Racit, outside opinions could push her back into uncertainty fast. Viewer perception would probably look similar. A section of the audience would romanticize Racit's decision. Another section would see it as emotionally complicated. Some would believe Mallory is impossible to reassure. Others would believe Racit created the distrust he is now frustrated by. And the uncomfortable answer may be that neither person is completely wrong. Rasit's love can be real. Mallory's fear can be real. Rasit's sacrifice can be generous. His secrecy can still be damaging. Mallory's suspicion can be understandable. Her conclusions can still be unfair. A relationship does not need one obvious villain to become dysfunctional. Sometimes two people genuinely care about each other and still keep triggering the exact fear the other person cannot handle. That is what seems to be happening here. And the biggest unresolved question is not whether Mallory stays tonight. She does. The bigger question is why she stays tomorrow. Does she stay because she wants to rebuild? Does she stay because she finally understands Racit differently? Or does she stay because she feels guilty walking away from somebody who gave up something important for her? Those motivations might look identical, during the next few days. Long term, they lead to completely different outcomes. Racit also has to decide whether he truly has the patience for trust to rebuild slowly. He says he does not want to constantly prove himself. That is understandable. But Mallorie is not going to erase months of fear because of one emotional night. The next time something feels unclear, she may still tense up. The next time Racit gets quiet, she may still wonder. The next time he says, "I will explain later," she may still panic. Can Racit respond to that without resentment? Can he understand that rebuilding trust is different from endlessly proving innocence? That is a fine line, and Mallorie has her own decision. Can she stay without keeping herself emotionally prepared to run at the first sign of trouble? Because you cannot build a future with somebody while your emotional suitcase remains packed beside the door. That bag becomes the perfect symbol for their entire relationship. Mallorie physically packed it that night. Emotionally, she had been packing it for weeks. Every unanswered question added something. Every suspicious moment added something. Every argument made the bag a little heavier. So when she finally places it back down, she is not choosing Racit forever. She is choosing to stop leaving long enough to see whether something different can be built. And that may actually be the harder choice. Leaving gives Mallorie a clean answer. Staying means living with uncertainty. Staying means accepting that Racit may love her and still disappoint her. It means accepting that she may trust him more and still occasionally feel afraid. It means both of them have to stop demanding certainty from each other. Racit watches her put the bag down, and for once, he does not seem to push her for more. He does not ask, "So are we okay?" He does not demand a promise. He does not turn the moment into a contract. Mallorie tells him she is staying for now, and Racit accepts it. That may sound small after everything he sacrificed, but emotionally, it is exactly the response this relationship needs. No huge promises, no fake reset button, no pretending trust can be repaired in one night. Just one honest decision. Mallorie finally believes Racit loves her. Racit finally understands that loving Mallorie does not mean controlling the terms of her choices. Now we get to the part that will actually determine their future. Can love survive once it no longer has a dramatic sacrifice to hide behind? Can Racit become transparent before Mallorie has to demand it? Can Mallorie learn to ask questions without already writing the guilty verdict in her head? Can both of them stop treating fear as proof? Because if they cannot do that, the sacrifice may not save the relationship. It may only make the eventual ending more painful. And that is the question I would put to viewers. If you were Mallorie, and you discovered that Racit had secretly given up something life-changing for you without asking for anything in return, would that be enough for you to put the bag down? Or would you still walk away because love without transparency is not the same thing as trust? This story is fictional,